The Republican Supreme Court justices rubber stamped a racially based gerrymander of two South Carolina congressional districts that had the purpose of diluting black voters. Justice Alito wrote the opinion published earlier today that permitted the South Carolina Republicans to engage in obvious racially based gerrymandering. The Republicans in South Carolina removed 30,000 black voters living in one county from a competitive congressional district and placed them in the 6th congressional district that was already dominated by black voters as a majority and was represented by James Clyburn. Alito and the other Republican justices disagreed with the findings of fact made by a panel of 3 district court judges that the gerrymander was based on race, obviously not on partisan politics. Republican justices had concluded in an earlier case that partisan gerrymandering was not subject to judicial review, even when the gerrymandering resulted in congressional districts becoming uncompetitive, that all future congressional elections in those districts were rendered meaningless. The state legislature, in drawing the district lines, had already decided which party will win. Why bother to even vote in a congressional election when your congressional district has been gerrymandered to guarantee the election of one party's candidate and you support the other party? That is what happened to Nashville. That was carved up by the Republicans in the state legislature into 3 pieces that were then joined with heavily Trumpified rural areas and small towns, depriving Nashville voters of even any hope in the future of re-electing a Democrat. And their Democrat representative had been Jim Cooper, who won 100% of the vote prior to the gerrymandering. He retired after it because, as intended by the Republicans in the state legislature, no Democrat had a chance to win any of the 3 redrawn districts, and Nashville is not now represented by anyone living in Nashville, one of the major metropolitan cities in the United States. Black voters in Nashville now have no say at all in congressional elections after the Republicans separated their precincts out in North Nashville and joined those areas with heavily Republican rural areas dominated by Trump true believers. Tennessee will be carried by Trump by 55 to 60% of the vote, even if he is convicted of 1 or more felonies, which might be lower if he is convicted to maybe 55% from 60%, but he would still carry Tennessee even if convicted of multiple felonies. Back to the most recent anti-democracy decision released by the Republican justices earlier today. The findings of fact made by a 3-judge panel were based on the testimony of witnesses and documents. Alito wrote that those findings of fact were clearly erroneous. That's a high standard to overrule a lower court finding of facts. Findings of fact by a lower court judge can only be set aside by an appellate court using the clearly erroneous legal standard. It is rare for an appellate court to dismiss findings of fact, particularly detailed findings of fact based on witness testimony and documents made by a lower court judge. In this case, it was a 3-judge panel. But an exception was made in this South Carolina gerrymandering case in order to make one congressional in South Carolina non-competitive for the white incumbent by moving 30,000 black voters out of her district into one that the Republicans had already created that had a majority of black voters before those 30,000 were moved into it. Even when it is obvious that the Republicans engaged in racial gerrymandering, which is the case in Nashville and in South Carolina, they can get away with making black votes meaningless by simply saying that the gerrymander was because they voted for Democrats rather than because of their race. Alito will be participating in cases involving Trump's claim for absolute immunity and the criminal convictions of those who participated in the insurrection. I have previously discussed both of those pending cases. He has already made clear how he wants to rule in those cases, and it is not in a manner that would be supportive of democracy. Alito displayed flags at his house and vacation home that sent a clear message of support for Trump's claim that the election was stolen from him. Alito blamed his wife for the upside-down flag at his home, and he has not yet responded, when I last checked, to the news stories released yesterday that showed a flag that many of the insurrectionists carried into the when they assaulted the Capitol, flying over his vacation home. But what can you do? Like Thomas, he has the power, and he is not accountable to anyone, no matter how much damage he does to America's democracy. The far-right Republican justices, who are not conservative but 19th century reactionaries, have already started to implement and impose on America their religious and political beliefs. Elections do matter, and anyone opposed to the direction that they are taking the United States, and it is only starting, I'm afraid, need to play the long game, and that long game means, in this context, decades of how they decide to vote.